Nathan, so you are leading a growing team, a fast growing team in the financial industry, but you have not always been in this personal finance space. So why personal finance and why now?
That's a really, really good question. Because if you would have asked me a few years ago, I could have given you a million scenarios and not one of them, like of what I'd be doing, and not one of them would have been, finance. And so, I guess what started, like I was in the military. I was saving money in a thrift savings plan, a TSP, which is like a federal 401k for all intents and purposes. And I've been losing money. And so I sat down with a professional. I learned about strategies for asset protection and cash accumulation that honestly sounded too good to be true, but also too good to pass up. So I started saving. I started saving a few extra $100 a month. Fast forward a few years, I realized the significance and legitimacy of what I was doing. And I decided to get licensed with the intent to help friends and family. Like I had no intent to change my career. I was doing very well. I was doing very well in the government sector as a contractor after leaving the military. And so as I started kind of entering into this space, though, I realized we've entered the greatest transition of wealth in the history of this country. We're losing financial professionals at a significant rate. Those two things are happening because the baby boomer generation is dying and retiring. And what we see is like this influx of people moving into this space. And a lot of the times they're limited in scope. Maybe it's because they entered into banking or investment advising or insurance. Either way, like they kind of watch that lane. And then also maybe they're just not getting the training they need. I've talked to several people with different organizations and they're like, yeah, I started working for them and they were like, hey, just go sell this product, rather than actually like providing education and understanding, hey, what are we doing for the client and how can we bring a holistic approach to financial well-being? And that component is extraordinarily significant because every part of our portfolio, it can either complement or contradict each other. And we want to make sure that everything's working in the right direction. And so all that being said, as I realized these things, and then on top of that, started outpacing my salary. Now I was making a healthy six figures. I realized like, hey, not only is this something that I'm passionate about and something that I can do, but I can also still provide for my family and maintain or enhance the lifestyle that I've created. And so I did. I decided to build a team. I'm very driven. I decided to build a team of ethically driven professionals. And that's what got me into this space. It's like, hey, we can be the difference. I'm the one who's crazy enough to think that we can change everything. And so we are.
One of the things I heard you saying is it's very important to have good financial knowledge and education. What would you say to people? Like, what is a way that your everyday American can improve their own personal financial literacy?
Man, that's another great question. So there are different books that we can read. There's different things that we can do. We can listen on Audible to things, but it takes like studying and putting effort in. Now here's the big thing. Does everybody have time for that? No, because everybody's out there doing whatever it is they're getting paid to do. That is where we spend the majority of our time. Like think about that for a second. Whatever we do professionally to make money is where we spend the majority of our time. And so people don't necessarily have the time to go and be the financial expert, the financial professional. That's why the number one thing they can do is work with a financial professional. But then it's like who we work with, because there are hundreds of different companies, thousands of different products. Who do we go to know that what we're doing is best for us? And in that regard, I recommend working with an independent, non-captive financial professional. Because when we talk about independent, like first of all, like their goal, their responsibility, if they're independent and non-captive, their goal and responsibility is to legitimately find the best strategy for the client. And they're able to do that a little bit more effectively. And I'm not trying to say anything bad about anybody, but I will state facts. When people are captive to an organization, they only have access to that company's products and services. So if there's something that's better and more appropriate for the needs of the client, most times they wouldn't even know about it. But if they do from prior experience, they still wouldn't be able to provide access to it. Whereas a non-captive, an independent professional, they have access to, it depends, because there are different organizations that facilitate the use or partnership with these companies for the independent agent. And so those are called IMOs, RMOs, or FMOs. So independent, regional, or field marketing organizations. And they are the intermediary between the independent and the companies that they'll access to serve the clients they intend to serve. And so some of those organizations have access to 5 to 10 companies. Some of them have access to a couple dozen. Some of them have access to 190, right? Some of them have access to a vast majority, which really gives them the ability to go and find like, hey, what is best for my client? What can I do to help this client? And the best, I would say in that regard too, have access to securities and insurance, right? When we're looking at like how we operate within financial services. Again, you have banking, securities, and insurance. Now, banking, anybody can really learn about how different banks may be able to help meet needs of clients based on that bank and what they're, what they have available to them. But securities and insurance, like there's licenses and things that we have to get to be able to access different products and services in those spaces. So I would say it is very important. It would behoove people to work with an independent, non-captive financial professional who has access to securities and insurance and a larger swath of companies in this country. And that expert, that person, their responsibility is to understand the client, the goals they have, the situation that they're in, the situation they want to be in. And then they go and look at, again, they look at this broad spectrum of companies and the different products they have that are going to be most efficient for the client based on their individual needs, because each company, each product serves a different purpose, and there's a time and a place for a variety of different things to meet the needs of the people of this country.
Now, you've met with hundreds and hundreds of different individuals across the country, different ages.
Yeah.
What would you say are some of the biggest challenges facing people like today in our modern society when it comes to personal finance?
That's man, you got a solid line of questioning. And so I would say there's a couple of things. The biggest challenge is a lack of knowledge, a lack of education, a lack of understanding what to do with the money, right? With the money they have. Now, that's the first thing that comes to mind when you say that. But then if we kind of break that down a little bit, some people aren't making enough money, right? Inflation has been eating us up for the past couple of years, right? It was like 8.5% in 2022, 6.5% last year. And it's at about, I think they're saying it's 3.5%, but like, first of all, they don't, I'm not going to dive. This is not a class on inflation, but like this, we are up percentages. So if it was 8% plus 8.5% plus 6.5%, that puts us at about what is that, like 15%, right? And then if we add 3.5%, so now we're talking about 18.5% up from where we were a couple of years ago. That's extraordinary. It's hitting people hard because the dollar doesn't go as far as it did, but people aren't making more money.
Right.
So what are we doing to supplement our income?
Mm-hmm.
How can we generate more revenue? That's something that people need to think about. And another thing along that same token, guys, the Internal Revenue Code was written for entrepreneurs, business owners, and employers. If you're not falling into one of those categories, you're not maximizing tax advantages. It's literally that simple. So we're leaving over a lifetime hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars on the table that we could otherwise not. And to fall into one of those categories now in this day and age is very simple. But it's just about knowing what you can do. So those are a couple of things, again, kind of diving down the rabbit hole here, but cash accumulation is a big one. But the other thing is, for the people who are making enough money, they don't know where to put it, right? A lot of people are putting their money in 401ks, and I'm not here to bash on a 401k, but again, I'll highlight some facts for you. The first self-funded retirement account, 401k, was established in 1980. The average self-funded retirement account right now for a 65-year-old, so 44 years later, which is about the average working life of an individual if we intend to retire, the average 401k for a 65-year-old right now has about $230,000 in it.
Not enough.
Nobody can retire in this economy with that amount of money. Not for more than a year or two. Because think about this. Whatever our living expenses are now, we have to multiply that, our annual living expenses. We got to have enough of that to last us for 30 years.
Or more.
Or more. And right. Because that's the other thing, which actually ties into the next biggest concern that I see for people is they're scared about living their money. And so what are we doing to help make sure that doesn't happen? And there's three ways that money grows: fixed, variable, and indexed. And diversification involves a little bit of each, like a fixed account for an emergency fund, a variable account for people who want to kind of play and maybe potentially realize big gains, but you can also realize big loss. And then index strategies. Here's where we can realize loss without we can realize gains without experiencing loss, right? About how amazing would it be to have a foundation and a retirement strategy where you're realizing 8 to 10% gains, but guaranteed never to realize depreciation due to market volatility.
That's huge. Yeah.
Right.
And I'm also talking with lots of people who have never heard of such a thing before. Like, what's an index strategy? People are familiar with variable. They're familiar with fixed. Maybe they don't know those names. Well, an index strategy, or even the concept of what an index is, back to your issue of financial education, right?
Right.
Would you say that this actually is an issue that's affecting our nation at large? And is it a national security issue even?
These are amazing questions. They really are. So yes, it is an issue at large. The percentage of people who don't have a financial plan or strategy is insane. And when I think about that, it's like, we have 80 years to make the lives of our family better. Like we have 80 years to make a difference, and everybody that comes after us, and in most cases we don't. We pass on the same economic status from generation to generation. And so like as a nation at large, again, instead of seeing growth potential and the realization of the American dream, we're seeing people again pass on the same economic status, and we're seeing a deterioration in that regard. We're seeing, like, look at the economy. A lot of that has to do with the fact that people have no idea what it is they're doing with their money. A lot of that has to do with the fact that people weren't educated. They're not taught the rules of the game, so they don't play to win. And a lot of people think the game is rigged against them, and it's not. And so again, on a national level, like across the country, I think that is a significant issue. When it comes to national security, and I don't want to dive too deep in this, but I do want to say, like, there's a lot of different components there that I think are relevant as it relates to national security. Because we are an independent nation. And again, I don't want to dive too deep in this, but we are intended to be independent. When we become dependent, we are sacrificing the security of ourselves, the security of our family, and the security of the people who rely upon us. We should be independent. If we don't know how to establish that independence, especially from a financial perspective, then once again, we will be required to be dependent. And that puts us at a significant disadvantage, especially when it comes to national security. Because again, we are relying more and more on resources or goods or products and services that are not benefiting our nation necessarily, because we're having outsourced or whatever the case may be. And there's a lot of different ways that I can take that conversation, but I typically tend to steer clear from some of that. But I will say this too. I think the financial education part, I think that as it relates to national security, that is an extraordinary component, because when we teach people that what they've been taught, right? Because we don't have financial education in this country. I'm pretty sure everybody can agree on that. We enter into the workforce after graduating high school with no genuine understanding of what we should do with the money that we're making. And so we go and we work for a company. That company tells us to put our money in a 401k. They don't talk about the tax benefits to the company. They don't talk about the tax considerations related to that money and how we can access it. They don't talk about when we can access it. They don't talk about where our money's going and how it's supposed to sustain us for the last third of our lives. They just tell us to put our money in that account. Matter of fact, a lot of companies automatically enroll people into that account. They don't even, without any type of conversation whatsoever. And so they go and put their money in this vehicle that is intended to get them, for the last third of their lives without a job. And it not only is it not, but helping educate people and helping them realize, like, hey, here's some of the things that we can do to supplement that, or to replace that, or to make sure that you have the retirement that you need. What it does is it cracks open a little bit of, I'd say, belief, and in some ways almost disbelief, because now you're kind of realizing that what you've been taught is not necessarily the end. Like, just because that was what you were taught, it doesn't make that inaccurate, but that doesn't mean that there's so much more to be taught in that space that can help you get to where you're going. So I think cracking that egg open and helping people realize there's more to be learned, there's more to understand, and what we've been told is not necessarily the end all. I think that alone, and how that thought process can shift in people, I think that will help us from a national security perspective, because they'll realize that what we are being taught about this component, if that's not necessarily the all, then maybe there's other things that we're being taught that we could dive into a little bit more to, again, increase our independence and put us in a better position to be more fortified as it relates to any adversary across the world that may be trying to do our nation harm. And again, I could talk about that all day. I try not to dive into some of those concepts, because we're dabbling into territory where people, they may feel alienated, or they may feel like that's not a conversation they're equipped to have. And at the end of the day, my job as a financial professional is to understand where people are financially. Where are you at? What are the goals that you have? Like, what do you want to see accomplished? And then I'm going to go find the best strategies, resources, companies, products, services, whatever it is, to bring together to make sure that your goals are effectively accomplished. And it is a lot easier than most people think.
So, at each stage of our life, as we age, we have different needs, different goals. So as you're talking with people at those different stages of life, what are some of the things they should be thinking about?
Okay, so I'll just give a few examples, because that's a lot. That is a loaded question, because there are people from all age ranges, that need different things. And so, I would say for young people specifically, look, the two biggest factors as they relate to wealth generation is how much money you're saving and how much time you have to save. So like the sooner you start saving, the better. But most young people, I talk to young people on a regular basis too. Most young people, they're not thinking in that direction. They're like, well, I don't have enough money to save, or whatever excuse they're telling themselves. When in reality, like just building that habit, even if it's 25, 50 bucks a month, like you're starting to build that muscle memory. So as you start making more, you're going to start saving more, and you're going to find yourself in the position that you need to be in. Whereas if you're like most people and you don't start thinking about it till your mid 30s or whatever, now you have 15 years to catch up on.
Yeah.
At least.
Yeah.
And if I were to show you the time value of a dollar and what we can do with it in 15 years, your mind would be blown. And so it's essential that young people, again, get out of your own way and start thinking of how you can save. We've got to get out of this mind frame of like, when it comes to like, wealth management, a lot of people are thinking like, spending habits. They're looking at their spending habits, and that's where their brain is. How do I mitigate my spending habits? No. That is the wrong approach. You've got to start looking at your saving habits. What are your saving habits? You should be paying yourself first. You've got to learn, again, these rules of money and how to play to win, and then you can. So that's for younger people. For older people, because I talk to older people on a regular basis, and a lot of them keep their money in like a 401k. The 401k is variable. Let's talk about that for just a second. It's a variable strategy, meaning it goes up and it goes down. You can lose money, you can realize gains, but there's also fees that you're paying, period. Usually on average, they're about 2.6 to 5%. And those fees, right, of the accumulated value. So the more money you have in, the more you're paying in those fees. So as you get older, the more money you have at some point, and this varies from person to person, you should move that money out of the variable market, because we're no longer like the risk. We don't need to take risk. We're getting too close to the kind of at the end game. We don't want to continue that risk. And it takes on average 4 years to bounce back from a 20% decline. We don't have that time, right? So not only do we want to move it out of the variable market, but we want to get it into a vehicle that is no longer susceptible to those sales fees, management fees, and advisory fees. So we take that money and put it into a vehicle that realizes growth based on index performance, but also has no fees and no loss due to market volatility. And not only that, some of these strategies have a guaranteed income for life. So even if the money that you put in and the interest that it gains has been depleted, you will, and you're still alive at that time, they will still continue to pay you until you die.
Yeah,
and
that's powerful.
It is powerful. And most people don't know this. They're not talking about it. They're not taught these things. And this is why, and I know I'm getting fired up, this is why I'm so passionate about this. Because having this basic understanding of what to use, when, and how will put people in a position to not only change their lives, but the lives of their families for generations to come.
Yes. Yes. And the lives of families, generations to come, though, I could ask you questions for hours. Okay, 2 more questions. And this is related to passing on generational wealth. What's stopping us from passing on generational wealth? What happens when somebody passes, they leave a legacy?
Yeah. So I'd say the main factor that's stopping us is people don't have a plan in place to do it. They're not even thinking about it. I talk to people all the time, and look, some people are like, hey, I don't need to leave anything for anybody. Like, what's that going to do for me? And people may, look at that ideology disparagingly, but like, look, we're not here to determine what people think and how they think. We're here to help them get to whatever their goals are. So some people just aren't thinking in that direction. That's the first thing. And then other people would like to, but again, they're not thinking in that direction. The other thing is they don't know what to do that. They don't know the best ways to do that, because if we look at like 401k or TSP or IRA, we look at the traditional retirement supplements that are used by the majority of this country for cash accumulation. They're not getting them to retirement, let alone to any generational wealth, not to mention the taxes that would be imposed upon them after they're passing away, before their family accesses those funds. Like, that is not a good vehicle for generational wealth, period. So it's not just a lack of education, but it's a lack of leveraging the right vehicles. And then on top of that, we've got to consider the probate process, right? When we look at probate, that's when our assets are basically like the court system determines what's going to happen to our assets after we pass away. That's the simplified explanation of that. And for an average probate right now, for an uncontested probate, meaning nobody's fighting over your assets, the average depreciation of assets looks about like 5 to 10%. For a contested probate, which is usually what happens more frequently, because when we pass away, everybody wants a piece of the pie, especially if it's a big pie. So they'll go contest their portion of the pie. And on average, we're seeing about a 20 to 30% depreciation of assets there. And so, like, how do we bypass probate? how do we make sure that we have assets to leave our family? And what are the ways that we can, what are the things that we can do to mitigate the tax or legal fees that will come with that? And the short answer, life insurance, right? Like that's a very quick way to make sure that you're leaving some sort of legacy. Now there's more to it than that. I would say this, one of the other issues we have with leaving a legacy for generations to come is when they do, if they do have the assets, they did bypass probate, they played that game well, but they left no direction. They left no guidance on how to manage those funds. What can we do with those funds? When can we access those funds? How do I maintain those funds? What are we doing to make sure that our legacy is not squandered in one to two generations? And instead, how do we set people up again for generations to come? And that is a lack of knowledge and understanding. And that's why the education bit is so essential.
Yeah. So maybe next time we can talk about that. But for today, one last final question is, what is the last piece of advice that you'd like to give today or leave today?
Man, that is hard. Like if I had one thing to say to everybody, to leave everybody with, I think I already mentioned it. You need to start saving. You've got to stop thinking about your spending habits and start thinking about your saving habits. You've just got to. Like if you want to achieve any financial goal, especially financial freedom or independence, it's not going to magically appear from anyone or anything. You've got to do that. You've got to take responsibility, and that responsibility comes with your ability to save. Now, if there was a second thing, again, I would say work with an independent, non-captive professional to help you know how to save. Because it's one thing to save, but again, if you put your money like in a bank account, for example, according to the FDIC, the average returns on a bank account right now are 0.46% return with inflation, regardless of what the numbers is, what they say the numbers are, pardon me. Let's say it's 5% right now. That means the buying power of your dollar is depreciating on average by 4.5% annually. So you've got to know where to save. It's not just the saving habit. You've got to know what is the most efficient way to do that based on the goals that you have. Because there are different vehicles for different purposes. And so that's what I would say. Start saving and know where to save.
All right. So start saving, know where to save. Treasure trove of information here today. Thank you so much, Nathan.
It's my pleasure. Thank you. I appreciate you.